Today you are going to hear the testimony of Omar al-Masri, the most feared Islamic debater in the United States. He walked onto the stage with one single goal: to destroy Christianity. Intelligent, cold, and provocative, he had already defeated dozens of pastors, until he faced the American Charlie Kirk. The whole world was watching when that clash became something far greater than a debate. In seconds, Omar's sharp words began to falter, and before him appeared a power that no argument could silence. What happened that night would change everything: his faith, his destiny, and even the meaning of truth. Get ready, because what you are about to witness is intense, real, and impossible to forget. And to begin, make sure you are subscribed, like the video, and tell me where you are watching from, because this story is going to move you.
I remember everything clearly. Every detail, every sound, every sensation, as if time had stopped just to make me remember where I came from and who I was before everything happened. My name is Omar al-Masri, and before any transformation, before any tear, I was just a man obsessed with winning. I was born in Amman, the capital of Jordan, into a family where faith was not just a belief. It was a heritage, a duty, almost an invisible prison. My father was an imam, a respected leader known for his strictness and authority. He believed that devotion was born from fear and discipline. My mother, a professor of Arabic literature, taught me from an early age the power of words, and perhaps it was that power that became my weapon, and later, my downfall. While other children played on the dusty streets, I spent my afternoons memorizing the Quran. With each verse I recited correctly, my father smiled with pride. With each mistake, his gaze hardened. I grew up believing that a man's worth was measured by the number of arguments he had to defend his faith, and I wanted to be the best. By the time I was 17, I was already debating older scholars. By 20, I was confronting Christians in Middle Eastern universities. I was arrogant, cold, and precise. I learned to use silence as a weapon and doubt as poison. When I moved to the United States to continue my studies in philosophy, I found a new battlefield. The auditoriums were larger, the audience more curious, and the opponents more confident. And it was there that I became a kind of academic celebrity. Newspapers called me the Muslim that no pastor could defeat. I loved that title. It was as if every round of applause confirmed that I was right, and that the rest of the world was lost. But what no one saw was the man behind the microphone. The one who, after every debate, returned to his hotel room and stared at his reflection, trying to understand why the faith he defended so passionately never made him feel peace. I read, studied, prayed, fasted, but God felt distant, as if he lived in a universe I could never reach. I said I believed, but deep down there was a silent echo inside me whispering, "What if you are wrong?" The American streets confused me. I saw Christians singing in public squares, smiling as if they had found something that could not be explained. They did not seem bound by rules or driven by fear. I watched them with a mixture of disdain and envy. How could they have so much peace if they were wrong? That question began to haunt me. Sometimes it came in the middle of the night, like a voice in the dark, and I drowned it out with more study, more speeches, more debates. I thought I was defending God, but in reality I was only trying to prove to myself that he existed. By the time I turned 30, I was being invited to television shows, conferences, and universities. The stage became my home, the cameras, my congregation. With every applause I felt alive, but the silence of the night revealed that I was actually dying inside. It was as if I knew every word about God, but had never heard his voice. And then came the invitation that would change everything. It was the year 2020, and the world was different. The stage was now global, live broadcasts, millions of views, instant opinions. That was when I received a proposal to debate Charlie Kirk, an American known for defending the Christian faith with solid arguments and an irritating calm. The topic was provocative. Is the Bible the Word of God, or just a book written by men? To me, that was a gift. I saw him as just another Christian I would dismantle in front of the cameras. I spent weeks preparing, studying ancient translations, reviewing contradictions, building lines of attack. I wanted a spectacle, The auditorium in Houston was packed. Lights, cameras, an excited audience. I felt that familiar chill in my stomach. Not fear, but excitement. I was about to prove that the Christian faith was nothing more than an emotional construct. In the first minutes, the debate went exactly as I expected. I dominated the stage, fired off quotes in Hebrew, questioned the chronology of the Gospels, pointed out historical errors and translation contradictions. I smiled between my lines, confident, but something began to disturb me. Charlie didn't react. He didn't get irritated. He didn't counterattack. He just listened to me with his eyes fixed, as if he were looking beyond what I was saying. When I reached my final point, I used the phrase that always drew applause. "Do you really believe that a crucified man can forgive sins?" Charlie remained silent for a second, then leaned toward the microphone and answered with a disarming calm. "I don't believe, I know." For a moment, the sound of the audience disappeared. The lights seemed brighter, the air heavier. I didn't know what to say. That answer, so simple, cut through all my defenses. I know. I, who had spent my life collecting arguments, had never known anything. I had only repeated words. And for the first time, I felt a void that hurt physically. I ended the debate with the same confident tone, but inside I was broken. The phrase echoed in my mind like a drum. I know. For days I couldn't sleep. I relived his gaze, his serenity, his lack of fear. How could someone speak of faith with such certainty, without needing to prove anything? I had everything, knowledge, respect, power, and yet something was missing. That night, alone in my apartment, I looked up at the ceiling and said in a low voice, "If this Jesus is more than an idea, show me who he is." And it was with that almost whispered request that my life began to change. 3 days later, I was at home, reviewing the debate video. It was early morning and the sound of the recording echoed through the quiet apartment. I paused each segment, trying to find a loophole, a logical flaw. And then, something inexplicable happened. The video froze. The image froze right on. Charlie Kirk, at the moment, he said, "Jesus didn't come to defeat you, he came to love you." The words were stuck on the screen as if time had stopped. Suddenly, the apartment lights flickered. A gentle breeze blew through the window, but there was no wind outside. The air grew thick, and a shiver ran through me. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out. I fell to my knees, not understanding what was happening. Then something happened that cannot be described logically. I didn't hear an external sound. It wasn't a human voice. It was a voice speaking beside me, but with a clarity that is impossible to ignore. "You wanted to destroy my word, but it was my love that destroyed you." At that moment, all the defenses I had built up over 30 years crumbled. I felt something I had never felt before, a living presence, powerful and yet sweet. Fear turned to peace. Tears began to fall, uncontrollable. I cried until my body ached. I cried because I realized that my whole life had been a desperate search for a God who, in fact, it was there all along. There were no bright lights, no crowds of voices, just silence, the wind, and a peace so profound it seemed to come from another world. For long minutes I remained kneeling, speechless, just crying. I, who always needed to explain everything, couldn't explain anything. I just knew that something inside me had changed forever. When I managed to stand up, the room looked the same, but I was no longer the same man. The weight I'd carried for so many years, pride, vanity, fear, had vanished. For the first time, the silence didn't hurt. On the contrary, it was beautiful, it was light. I didn't understand what had happened, but I knew I would never be who I was again. The cold, arrogant debater had died there, on the floor of that apartment. In his place was born a man who, for the first time, had found the peace he had spent his entire life trying to prove didn't exist. And so began something I never imagined I would experience. A journey that would change everything. A quest that would cease to be intellectual and become spiritual. And in that moment, without knowing it, I was about to discover that when God decides to speak to someone, no human argument can silence him. 2 days after that night, when everything inside me changed, the phone rang with news that left me speechless. It was the middle of the night. On the other end of the line, my mother's voice trembled. My sister Layla had been in a serious car accident in Jordan. The words coma and low chance of survival felt like a blow. I remember standing there for a few seconds, completely breathless, my cell phone trembling in my hands. For a moment, all the faith I thought I had begun to discover seemed to vanish. Panic took over. I sat on the floor of my apartment, leaning my back against the cold wall, and began to tremble. I, the man of answers, the debater who always had a logical explanation for everything, now couldn't even think. I felt despair pierce my chest like an invisible blade. I wanted to call someone, but there was no one. In that moment, I realized that loneliness was the price of pride. The next few hours were a blur. I remember pacing, trying to pray, but the words felt hollow. For the first time, I knew there was no point in reciting ancient formulas. I needed something real. So, without planning, without considering the consequences, I knelt on the floor from my room and closed my eyes. And the words just came out. Jesus, if it was you who spoke to me, save my sister. My voice cracked, my body trembled, and I wept like a child. It wasn't a rehearsed prayer, it was a cry from my soul. I didn't know how to pray like Christians. All I knew was that night, the name of Jesus came from my lips with a sincerity never before felt. I didn't ask for a sign, I didn't ask for proof. I just asked him to save her. The next few hours were a mixture of anguish and silence. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw my sister's face. The clock seemed to stop ticking. I waited for dawn, sitting on the floor, my hands clasped together, my eyes red. As the sun began to rise, my phone vibrated. It was a message from my mother. I opened it with my heart racing and read just one sentence. Layla woke up. The doctors don't understand how. I remember putting down my phone and putting my hands over my face. It was as if time had stopped. No explanation made sense. My philosopher's mind, accustomed to questioning everything, fell into absolute silence. The only thing I could feel was a shiver that ran through my entire body, and a deep, unquestionable certainty. He heard me. I stood up slowly, my legs weak, and began pacing the room. Each step felt like an echo. Everything in me knew something supernatural had happened. No coincidence could explain it. No human argument could erase what I had just experienced. It was real, it was personal, and it was Jesus. I picked up a Bible I had received weeks earlier from one of the debate organizers, and had been sitting forgotten on a shelf. It was still wrapped in wrapping paper. I sat up in bed and opened it without thinking. My eyes fell on the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I stared at those words for minutes that felt like hours. It was as if the page shimmered before my eyes. And then, unable to hold back the tears, I fell to my knees again. Now I understand, I murmured. And this time it was no longer doubt. It was surrender. In that moment, titles, debates, prestige, or victories no longer mattered. The man who had dedicated his life to destroying the Bible was now on his knees before it. That verse completely disarmed me. I finally understood that faith wasn't a theory to defend. It was a relationship to live. And I had just met the one who had always been waiting for me. But the path of faith, I soon discovered, isn't just about miracles and peace. It's also about pain, renunciation, and loss. And that's what came next. When I told my family what had happened, the silence on the other end of the line was worse than any scream. I could hear my father's breathing, heavy, pent up, filled with fury. He said nothing for a few seconds, until his voice cut through the air. You have dishonored the name of our house. I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. To him, I had committed something unforgivable. My mother wept silently, trying to defend me, but I knew that in that moment, I had lost the family I loved. In the following days, the news spread among former colleagues and religious leaders. Some tried to convince me I was being deceived. Others simply blocked me. I received harsh messages full of accusations. My speaking engagements were canceled. I was disinvited from events, banned from groups, and ignored by people who had previously called me master. Faith comes at a price, and mine began to be exacted early. I had found Jesus, but the world around me had lost me. And in a way, I felt lost too. The following weeks were long. I lost my job, had to leave the luxurious apartment where I lived, and moved into a simple room in Dallas. The money I had saved was slowly running out. I began working on small tasks, translating texts, proofreading private Arabic lessons. And yet, even with everything falling apart, there was something different about me. I wasn't alone anymore. Before, silence was a prison. Now, silence was the place where I found it. I remember the first time I walked into a small church in my neighborhood. It was simple, with wooden pews, white walls, and a cross on the altar. I sat in the back, trying to blend in. The service had begun, and the choir was singing a song I didn't even understand. But there was something about that melody, something that touched places in my heart I hadn't even known existed. The tears began to fall, unstoppable. I cried, but it wasn't a cry of guilt or regret. It was a cry of gratitude. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who wanted nothing from me. No titles, no answers. They just wanted to hug me and pray with me. Every week I returned to that place, sometimes just to sit in silence, other times to sing with my eyes closed, even though I didn't know all the words. And the longer I was there, the more I realized that the God I had sought for so many years in books and lectures was never far away. I was the one who was blind. Dealing with my family's rejection wasn't easy. My mother would send me short messages, afraid my father would find out. "I'm praying for you," she'd say, even though she didn't understand what kind of prayer that was now. I'd simply reply, "I love you." And I'd pray for her too. Some nights I still felt afraid of being watched, afraid of being recognized by people who might harm me. But in those moments I remembered the voice I heard that night. "You wanted to destroy my word, but it was my love that destroyed you." I thought about that sentence and realized it wasn't a sentence of defeat. It was a promise. He destroyed me to rebuild me. He broke the arrogant man to give birth to someone who finally knew what love was. And the more I delved into Scripture, the more I realized how it all made sense. The Gospel of John became my refuge. Every word seemed written for me. It was as if in every line Jesus was saying, "I have waited for you, Omar." I didn't understand why he had chosen me, nor why he had allowed me to fall so low before getting back up, but I knew that for some reason, he had found me. People around me began to notice the difference. The calmer look in my eyes, the light smile, the way I spoke. Some said I looked like a different man, and, in a way, it was true. Because when you find peace, it even changes your face. Even in the darkest days when money was scarce and uncertainty abounded, there was something inside me that couldn't be shaken. A new fire, a hope that didn't depend on circumstances. I had lost everything, position, respect, security. But I had gained something that couldn't be bought or taught, the real presence of God. And it's strange to say this, but it was at the moment I lost everything that I discovered what truly mattered. Sometimes God's love comes not as comfort, but as an earthquake. It dismantles everything that is false to rebuild from scratch what is true. Every time I entered that simple church, I remembered the day when weeping replaced arguments. And I realized that there, in that soft sound of singing voices and raised hands, was what I had always sought, the living presence of a God who responds, who consoles, and who transforms. I didn't know what lay ahead. I only knew that this was the beginning of something I could never deny again. The man who tried to destroy faith now found it in every breath, in every sunrise, in every memory of the sister who awakened when everyone said it was impossible. And deep down, I knew. This story was far from over. Something much bigger was coming, and I could sense that God was already preparing the next chapter. A year had passed since the day I fell to my knees in that small Dallas apartment. Much had changed. I was no longer the proud debater who stood on stages to win arguments, but the man who spoke with a trembling voice about grace and forgiveness. Life seemed to have found a new rhythm, quieter, lighter. But deep down, I knew that true faith is always tested, and my test came when I least expected it. That morning, I woke before sunrise. I had a lecture scheduled at a local university. It would be the first time I would speak openly about my transformation in front of a large audience, without a script, without hiding the name of Jesus. My hands sweated as I mentally reviewed my notes. I felt fear, but also a kind of courage that didn't come from within. When I arrived at the auditorium, there were hundreds of people, curious, skeptical, students, even former colleagues from my debate days. I knew some there weren't there to listen. They were there to attack. The lecture began quietly. I spoke about the void that knowledge cannot fill, about the search that no argument satisfies. The audience listened in silence, and then, suddenly, the back doors flew open. 3 men hurried in, wearing dark clothes and with grim expressions. The sound of doors slamming echoed through the auditorium. My heart raced. They walked to the front of the stage, interrupting everything. The audience tensed. One of them shouted, his face contorted with rage, "You betrayed your faith, your people, and your God." For a moment, everything inside me wanted to flee. The microphone trembled in my hands. The entire past flashed through my mind. My father, my old colleagues, the lonely nights. It was as if all the ghosts I thought I'd left behind had returned to surround me. That old fear, the same one that dominated me before I discovered grace, returned with a vengeance. The men began to approach the stage. One of them shoved me in the chest and I nearly lost my balance. The audience rose in alarm. I could hear murmurs, chairs scraping, hurried footsteps. The lights seemed brighter, the air thicker. For a moment, I thought it was the end. I silently asked myself, "Sir, is this how it ends?" But before I could retreat, I felt something inside me, an unnatural calm. The fear began to melt away, and an inexplicable force made me stand firm, microphone in hand. I looked at those men and realized that deep down, they were trapped in the same despair that had once trapped me. They weren't my enemies. They were mirrors of the man I once was. The voice that came out of me didn't sound like my own. Shaky but full of conviction, I said, "I didn't betray anyone. I just found the one who never left me." The silence that followed was absolute. No sound, no movement. It was as if time had stopped. Their eyes, once filled with hatred, filled with confusion. For a few seconds, no one breathed. Then security guards and teachers intervened, calmly pulling them away. They were restrained, and the tension gradually dissolved. I stood there, alone on the stage, microphone still in hand. My whole body was shaking, but I knew something had ended, and something new had begun. Tears began to fall without me even realizing it. I looked out at the audience and simply said, "You have just seen what faith is. Faith is not running away from the fire. It is remaining in it, knowing that God is with you." The audience was silent for a few seconds, then suddenly stood up. The sound of applause filled the auditorium. But for me, it wasn't a triumph. It was liberation. I walked slowly down the stage, still crying. That day marked the end of fear. For the first time, I realized that true faith is not something you can explain. It is something you live, even when the ground seems to disappear. That night, alone in the house, I sat in silence for a long time. I could still hear the men's voices echoing, "You betrayed your faith." And then I realized that yes, in a way, I had betrayed. But I had betrayed the lie that held me captive, betrayed the pride that separated me from the truth. And in return, I had found a love that doesn't demand perfection, only surrender. After that episode, something completely changed. I began to be contacted by people who had previously attacked me. Muslims in doubt, confused young people, atheists who had watched the video of the lecture and said they felt something strange, something they couldn't explain. I read each message with my heart racing. Some wrote, "What happened to you made me think." Others confessed that they had started reading the Bible in secret. It was as if, without realizing it, I had become a channel for something much greater than myself. I responded to everyone with the same phrase, the same one I've carried in my heart since that day. I wanted to destroy Christianity, but it was the love of Christ that destroyed me and remade me. These words are not poetry. They are scars. Because true love destroys what is false within us, it rips out fear, pride, and hatred, and leaves only truth in their place. Shortly thereafter, I began receiving invitations from various countries to share my testimony. Small churches, universities, podcasts. Every time I stepped onto a stage, I remembered the day I wanted to run away but didn't. I remembered the hateful eyes turning to silence, and I said to myself, it wasn't my strength, it was his. But the transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a process, and the more I shared my story, the more I realized it wasn't about me. It was about the power of a love that forgives even those who fought it. I saw people crying in the audience, not out of pity, but because they saw in me proof that God still speaks, still reaches, still transforms. Today, when I think about that day, I feel a mixture of gratitude and amazement, because that moment of confrontation, which could have ended in tragedy, was actually the point at which I finally understood what it means to live by faith. Faith didn't pull me out of the fire. It taught me to walk within it. After the talk, the response was enormous. The video spread across social media, and thousands of people began sending me messages. Some thanked me, others asked for help understanding what I had experienced. That was when, almost without planning, the ministry that leads my life today. Within a few months, I rented a small room in Dallas. Using simple equipment, I began recording videos to share the gospel in Arabic and English. At first, there were only a few viewers, but soon the comments began to multiply. People from Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Pakistan. Men and women wrote, "I found peace listening to you." I read each message with tears in my eyes, remembering who I once was, the man who thought peace was an illusion. During breaks in filming, I would sit in front of the switched-off camera and mutter to myself, before, I talked about God. Now I talk to him, and that was exactly it. I no longer spoke to prove a point. I spoke because I wanted the world to feel the same love that set me free. My sister Layla, fully recovered, began participating with me. It was she who suggested we create a channel dedicated to people in the Middle East seeking spiritual answers. She said, "If he lifted me up, it's because there are still many who need to be lifted up." And indeed, there were. Together we began recording messages of hope, short prayers and reflections on the Gospels. Sometimes during the broadcasts, Layla would cry. She said she still remembered the moment she woke up from her coma and felt a light envelop her. Today, she tells this story with a smile, and every time I see her talk, I remember the day I asked Jesus to save her. He didn't just save her, he brought us together again, in a way we'd never had before. Our small ministry began to grow. Persecuted people, exiles, and spiritual refugees began to seek us out. Men and women who were afraid to believe, afraid of losing everything. I understood each of them because I too had lost everything, and discovered that sometimes you have to lose your whole world to find heaven. We don't have big productions, sponsors, or gigantic structures. We only have the truth, and that's enough. Some nights after broadcasts, I stare out the studio window at the city lights. I think of the boy from Amman who memorized verses, the arrogant debater who believed he had mastered faith, the broken man who fell to his knees and heard a voice say, "It was my love that destroyed you." And I realized that this destruction was, in fact, the rebuilding of my soul. Today, when I speak to people living in fear or persecution, I don't speak as someone who has overcome. I speak as someone who has been reached. And every time I tell my story, I feel the same emotion as before, the same thrill, the same certainty. No one is too far away for God to reach. With each new video, with each message sent from some distant corner of the world, I remember that I was called not to debate, but to bear witness. Because in the end, that's what transforms the human heart. Not arguments, but encounters. And as I continue this journey, I know the purpose isn't over yet. Every story that reaches someone, every message that comforts a troubled soul, is just further proof that the love that destroyed me is still at work, healing, freeing, and transforming lives.
And if you've made it this far, it's because this story touched your heart too. Omar al-Masri's testimony reminds us that no one is beyond the reach of God's love. A man who wanted to destroy faith found true life when he was confronted not by an argument, but by a presence. The same love that restored Omar is still reaching people today. Perhaps that's why you're watching now. So check if you're already subscribed to the channel, leave your like so more people are reached by stories like this, and write in the comments, "I love Jesus," so that the world knows whose heart you have. And get ready. The next video is already appearing on the screen. From royalty to refugee, the Arab princess who escaped death after watching a banned Charlie Kirk video. You have no idea what's going to happen. Click now and join me on this journey of faith and transformation.